The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence, it was the smell. Burned insulation mixed with the sharp scent of fresh-cut wood drifted through the humid evening air as I pulled my pickup into the driveway. My headlights swept across my front yard and froze on something that made my stomach drop. My electrical service line was lying on the ground. It had been cleanly severed. Not storm damage, not an accident. Someone had climbed the utility pole at the edge of my property and deliberately cut the line feeding electricity into my home. "What the hell?" I whispered as I slammed the truck into park. I jumped out before the engine had even stopped running. The porch lights were dead. The security cameras I'd installed after months of harassment were dark. Even the digital clock glowing through my kitchen window had vanished into complete blackness. I grabbed my flashlight from behind the seat and hurried toward the pole. The heavy cable hung loosely, its copper exposed where fresh tool marks glinted beneath the beam. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. My phone buzzed. A notification from one of my battery-powered trail cameras. Motion detected. 4:12 p.m. I opened the clip. 3 people wearing reflective safety vests stood beneath the pole. One of them raised a pair of insulated cutters. Another pointed toward my house while talking. The third glanced around nervously before climbing into a white HOA maintenance truck with our community's logo splashed across the side. I replayed the video twice. No. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. They didn't. Behind me, tires crunched over gravel. I turned. My neighbor, Mark Reynolds, climbed out of his pickup wearing an expression I'd never seen before. His face had gone completely pale. "Jake," he said, almost out of breath, "you need to come with me." "What happened?" "It's not just your place." "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the entrance of our subdivision. The sky beyond the trees looked strangely dark. Normally, dozens of decorative streetlights lit the winding roads after sunset. Then, almost on cue, people started yelling. Porch doors slammed open, children cried, dogs barked from every direction. Across the neighborhood, one house after another vanished into darkness, as if someone had thrown a giant switch. Mark stared at me. "I just got off the phone with the electric company." "What did they say?" He swallowed hard. "They're sending emergency crews." "Why?" "Because," he hesitated, "they've already confirmed somebody illegally disconnected the wrong section of the main distribution feed." I looked back at my severed power line, then toward the neighborhood, disappearing into darkness. A cold realization settled over me. Whoever had ordered my electricity cut hadn't just targeted my home, they had triggered something much bigger. Far bigger than they understood. My phone rang. "Unknown number." I answered. "This is Jake." A calm voice replied. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes. My name is Special Investigator Daniel Brooks with the Regional Electric Utility." My heartbeat quickened. "We need you to stay exactly where you are." "Why?" There was a long pause. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Because the people who cut your power may have just committed multiple federal felonies." I wish I could tell you that everything started the day my power line was cut. It didn't. That night was simply the moment the fuse finally reached the powder keg. My name is Jake Carter. I'm 46 years old, and I own Carter Electrical Contracting, a small business I've spent more than 20 years building from the ground up in Franklin, Tennessee. We handle commercial wiring, farm installations, emergency repairs, and utility coordination across 3 counties. It's honest work, hard work, the kind where your hands are usually dirtier than your office desk, which is exactly how I like it. My father used to tell me, if you treat every customer's home like it's your own, you'll never run out of work. I built my business around that one sentence. The property where all this happened had belonged to my family for nearly 70 years. My grandfather bought the original 12 acres after returning from the Korean War. Back then there wasn't a subdivision for miles, just rolling pasture, oak trees, and a narrow gravel road leading to our farmhouse. I grew up fishing in the pond behind the house. I learned to drive an old Ford tractor in the south field. I buried both my parents beneath the giant maple tree overlooking the creek, exactly where they had asked to rest. Every fence post on that land held a memory. Every tree had a story. Selling it had never been an option. About 6 years before everything unraveled, a developer purchased the surrounding farmland and announced an upscale community called Willow Ridge Estates. Within 2 years, hundreds of expensive homes surrounded my family's property, like an island trapped in a sea of fresh pavement and manicured lawns. At first, I welcomed the new neighbors. I waved when families moved in. I helped elderly couples fix outdoor lighting. I even volunteered during neighborhood food drives, despite not technically living inside the HOA boundaries. Most of the residents were decent people. The problem wasn't them. The problem was the board, especially its president, Linda Ashcroft. The first time we met, she smiled so brightly it almost seemed genuine. "We're thrilled to have someone with your skills nearby," she'd said, while shaking my hand during a community picnic. "I appreciate that. Perhaps someday you'll consider joining the association." "I actually can't," I replied politely. "My property was never included in the development." Her smile didn't disappear. It simply became tighter. "Oh." That single word carried more disappointment than surprise. From that moment on, something changed. At first it was little things. Letters addressed to current resident appeared in my mailbox, reminding me about HOA landscaping standards. I ignored them. Then came notices demanding I repaint my barn to match community-approved colors. Again, I ignored them because they had absolutely no authority over my property. After that, contractors hired by the HOA accidentally mowed several feet inside my pasture. When I politely asked them to stop, they apologized and blamed confusing maps. I believed them. Then security guards began driving slowly past my gate several times a day. Too often to be coincidence. One afternoon, I walked over and asked one of them if everything was all right. The young guard looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir." "For what?" "We're just following instructions." "Whose instructions?" He hesitated before quietly answering. "The board wants us to document everything." "Everything." He glanced toward the clubhouse before lowering his voice. "Every vehicle, every visitor, every project you're working on." I felt my stomach tighten. "Why?" "I don't know." He genuinely looked uncomfortable. "I just work here." That conversation stayed with me. A week later, I noticed survey stakes appearing along the edge of my property. Bright orange ribbons fluttered in the wind, exactly where my utility easement crossed into the subdivision. I pulled one from the ground and looked at the fresh markings. They hadn't been there the day before. Someone was measuring my land again. When I called the county survey office the next morning, the clerk checked their records. "No active survey permits have been filed for your parcel, Mr. Carter." I stared at the stake lying across my truck seat. If the county didn't authorize it, then who did? That question lingered in my mind for weeks. I had no idea the answer would eventually leave an entire neighborhood sitting in darkness. The survey stakes kept appearing. No matter how many I pulled out, new ones showed up a few days later. Some were placed along my fence line. Others marked the utility easement that crossed the corner of my property before connecting to the neighborhood's underground electrical equipment. That easement had existed long before Willow Ridge Estates was ever built. The utility company had legal access to maintain it, but the land itself still belonged to me. Whoever was placing those markers wasn't just guessing, they were planning something. I decided it was time to get answers. The following Monday morning, I drove to the Willow Ridge clubhouse. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a white HOA maintenance truck, the same one I'd later see on my trail camera, and a black luxury SUV parked in the president's reserved space. Inside, the receptionist looked nervous the moment I introduced myself. "Is Mrs. Ashcroft available?" I'll let her know you're here." Less than a minute later, Linda Ashcroft stepped into the lobby, wearing an expensive navy blazer and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Carter," she said sweetly, "this is unexpected. I've got a few questions. I'm afraid we're very busy. It'll only take a minute." She folded her arms. "Go ahead." I placed one of the orange survey stakes on the reception counter. "Who keeps putting these on my property?" She glanced at it for barely a second. "I have no idea." "Really? Really? The county says they didn't authorize a survey." "Then perhaps you should ask someone else." I leaned slightly closer. "I am." Her smile disappeared. "You don't live inside Willow Ridge?" "No. So our internal projects aren't any of your concern." "My property is." She sighed dramatically, as if I were wasting her valuable time. "Mr. Carter, progress sometimes requires small adjustments." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means communities evolve. My land isn't evolving." "No." She looked directly into my eyes, but the area around it is. There was something about the way she said those words that made every instinct I had start screaming. This wasn't about landscaping. It wasn't about fences. It wasn't even about my barn. They wanted something. Before I could ask another question, the clubhouse doors opened. A tall man in an expensive grey suit walked in, carrying a leather portfolio. Linda's expression immediately brightened. Perfect timing. She turned toward me. Jake, I'd like you to meet Brandon Pierce, legal counsel for the association. He extended a hand. I've heard quite a bit about you. I wish I could say the same. His handshake was firm, almost rehearsed. We were just discussing future improvements, Linda said. Brandon nodded. Actually, Mr. Carter, we'd like to make you an offer. I'm listening. The association is interested in purchasing the utility easement crossing your property. I almost laughed. You can't buy an easement that already belongs to the utility company. We're aware of that. Then what exactly are you buying? The underlying land. It's not for sale. You haven't heard the price. I don't need to. His professional smile tightened. Everyone has a number. No. Think carefully. I already have. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Brandon calmly closed his portfolio. I'd advise you not to make emotional decisions. I'm making legal ones. As I turned to leave, Linda called after me. You know, I stopped without looking back. Neighborhoods have a way of becoming very uncomfortable for people who refuse to cooperate. The room fell silent. I slowly turned around. Was that supposed to be a threat? She shrugged innocently. I simply meant that change is inevitable. I walked out without another word. 2 days later, I found a bright yellow notice taped to my front gate. Final notice of property violations. The letter claimed I owed the HOA over $18,400 in accumulated fines for everything from unauthorized exterior structures to failure to maintain community standards. I wasn't even a member of the HOA. It was absurd. Before I could finish reading, a sheriff's patrol vehicle rolled into my driveway. An older deputy stepped out holding a folder. Mr. Carter? Yes. We received a complaint alleging you're obstructing community infrastructure and threatening HOA employees. I stared at him in disbelief. I've done neither. I figured as much. He lowered his voice. But I have to document the complaint. As we talked, another vehicle slowly drove past the entrance to my property. The same white HOA maintenance truck. It didn't stop. It just crept by. Slowly enough for everyone inside to watch us. The deputy noticed it too. You know those guys? I've seen them around. He frowned. They've been following this patrol car since I entered the subdivision. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't about fake fines anymore. This wasn't even about intimidation. Someone was carefully building a case against me. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting an overreaching HOA. I was fighting people with a plan. The moment the deputy drove away, I stopped reacting and started documenting. My father had always said, the person who keeps the best records usually wins the argument. That advice had helped me through business disputes, contract negotiations, and more than one insurance claim. Now it was about to become my lifeline. The next morning, I called the one person I trusted with complicated property issues, Emily Harper. Emily was 52, a real estate attorney who had spent nearly 3 decades untangling boundary disputes, easement conflicts, and title problems across Middle Tennessee. We'd met years earlier during a commercial property closing, and she'd earned a reputation for something every lawyer claimed, but very few actually delivered. She hated surprises. When I walked into her office carrying a cardboard box filled with photographs, certified letters, copies of the HOA notices, and the orange survey stakes, she raised one eyebrow. That's either a very organized client, she said, or a very serious problem. I'm hoping it's just the first one. She smiled faintly. Let's find out. For nearly 3 hours, we spread everything across her conference table. She arranged the documents by date. Every letter, every photograph, every invoice, every security camera timestamp. She barely spoke while reading. That worried me more than if she'd started asking questions. Finally, she picked up one of the HOA violation notices. They're citing community bylaws. So? She looked over her glasses. Those bylaws don't apply to you. I know. They know that too. So why send them? She leaned back in her chair. Because they're creating a paper trail. A paper trail for what? I don't know yet. Those 4 words hung in the room. Emily wasn't someone who guessed. If she didn't know, there was a reason. She opened her laptop and logged into the county property records database. Let's ignore what they're saying, she muttered. Let's look at what they're doing. One parcel after another appeared on the screen. Willow Ridge Estates. Common areas, retention ponds, road easements, utility corridors, then my property. She zoomed in. Something immediately caught her attention. That's strange. What? She enlarged an engineering map filed nearly 7 years earlier, when the subdivision was first approved. A thick blue line crossed the corner of my property. I recognized it instantly. The utility easement. Yes. She clicked another document, then another, each one newer than the last. Her expression slowly changed. What is it? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she printed 3 maps and laid them side by side. Look carefully. At first, they looked identical. Then I noticed it. The easement wasn't in exactly the same place. On the original approved plat, it crossed 30 feet inside my boundary. On a later engineering revision, it had mysteriously shifted, only by a few feet, but enough to change which equipment sat on whose land. That's impossible, I said. Survey lines don't move. They don't, Emily replied quietly, but drawings can. A cold feeling settled over me. Someone had altered the plans. Whether intentionally or through negligence, I didn't know. Emily immediately called the county planning office. After identifying herself, she requested certified copies of every engineering revision filed for Willow Ridge Estates. The clerk hesitated. That's odd. Emily pressed speakerphone. What is? There should be 6 revisions. And we only have 5. The 6th is missing? No, the clerk sounded confused. It was checked out 3 months ago. By whom? Another pause. I'm not supposed to release employee information. Emily's voice remained calm. I'm not asking for an employee. Silence. Then, it wasn't county staff. My heartbeat quickened. Who signed for it? Paper shuffled in the background. Finally, the clerk read the name aloud. Brandon Pierce, the HOA's attorney. Emily slowly lowered the phone. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad. For the first time all morning, she looked genuinely concerned. Jake. What? If their lawyer personally removed an official engineering file before this dispute started, she stopped herself. What? She met my eyes. Then we're no longer dealing with aggressive HOA enforcement. I swallowed. What are we dealing with? Before she could answer, her office phone rang. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. Emily, there's a man here from the electric utility. Emily frowned. We don't have an appointment. He says it's urgent. A minute later, a grey-haired utility engineer stepped into the conference room, carrying a large, rolled-up set of blueprints. He looked at me first, then at Emily. Without saying a word, he unrolled the plans across the table. The moment I saw them, my blood ran cold. Every major electrical feeder supplying Willow Ridge Estates ran through one narrow corridor. My land. And someone had drawn fresh red markings across it, exactly where my power line had later been cut. The room fell completely silent. The utility engineer rested both hands on the blueprints and looked from Emily to me. My name is Thomas Gallagher, he said. I've been with Cumberland Electric for 28 years. He tapped the red markings with the end of a pencil. These weren't on the original plans. Emily crossed her arms. Who added them? That's exactly what we're trying to determine. I leaned over the table. The red ink outlined a proposed relocation of the neighborhood's primary electrical feed, moving it several feet away from the recorded easement and deeper into my property. They wanted to move the line? I asked. Thomas nodded. Without filing a new easement agreement, Emily frowned. That's impossible. It should be. He reached into his leather briefcase and removed another folder. This arrived at our engineering office about 4 months ago. Inside was an application requesting approval for what was described as a routine utility relocation. It looked official at first glance until I saw the signature. My name, or at least something pretending to be my signature. I stared at it for several seconds before shaking my head. I never signed this. I know, Thomas replied quietly. We compared it to signatures from previous service agreements. They don't match. Emily immediately slid the document into a plastic evidence sleeve. Who submitted it? Thomas looked uncomfortable. It came through a private engineering consultant hired by Willow Ridge Estates. And who hired them? He didn't have to answer. We already knew. Linda Ashcroft and Brandon Pierce. Emily looked directly at me. They weren't trying to enforce HOA rules. They were trying to manufacture permission. Thomas nodded. When the relocation request stalled because ownership records didn't match, someone apparently decided to solve the problem another way. I knew exactly what he meant. Cut my power, force an emergency, create confusion, then relocate the lines while everyone believed it was part of the repair. It was bold, illegal, and incredibly dangerous. Thomas wasn't finished. There's something else. He opened another folder. This came from one of our subcontractors. Inside were photographs. Clear, high-resolution photographs. The white HOA maintenance truck sat beside the utility pole on my property. Workers wearing reflective vests were unloading equipment. One man held insulated cutting tools. Another carried a spool of temporary cable. And standing 20 feet away, watching everything, was Linda Ashcroft. The timestamp read 4:09 p.m. Only minutes before my trail camera recorded the same scene. Emily let out a slow breath. She was physically present. Thomas nodded. And according to GPS records from the truck, it remained there for 34 minutes. I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. For weeks I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining the pattern. Now the evidence was piling up faster than anyone could ignore. Emily carefully organized every document into separate folders. Forgery. She pointed to the fake signature. Unauthorized work inside a utility easement. She pointed to the engineering plans. Potential destruction of utility infrastructure. She tapped the photographs. And possibly conspiracy. Thomas looked at her seriously. The federal investigators are already reviewing it. That explained the phone call I'd received the night my power went out. The room grew quiet again. Finally, Emily closed the last folder. We're done negotiating. I looked at her. What happens now? She smiled for the first time all day. Now we sue. Word traveled through Willow Ridge faster than I expected. By the following afternoon, neighbors who had barely spoken to me in months began stopping by my gate. Several quietly admitted they'd been pressured into signing statements against me. Others confessed they'd attended HOA meetings where Linda repeatedly claimed I was blocking critical infrastructure improvements. One elderly resident handed me printed copies of board meeting minutes she'd secretly kept. They're deleting things from the official records, she whispered. I thought you should have these. The minutes included discussions that never appeared in the HOA's published versions, including one sentence that made Emily nearly jump out of her chair. Alternative measures should be considered if Mr. Carter refuses voluntary cooperation. No explanation. No context. Just that sentence. Emily immediately added it to our evidence file. 2 days later, we filed our lawsuit. Within hours, local news stations began calling. Then came the retaliation. Someone spray-painted "selfish" across my front fence. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox, accusing me of bankrupting the neighborhood. Fake social media posts claimed I'd intentionally caused the blackout to extort the HOA. Even my business received dozens of one-star reviews from accounts that had never been customers. It was psychological warfare, designed to isolate me, to make me settle. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. 3 weeks later, Emily called. They filed their response. Anything surprising? Yes. What? They're denying they ever ordered your power disconnected. I laughed bitterly. We have videos, GPS logs, photographs, forged documents, and witnesses. I know. She paused. And because they've denied everything under oath, her voice became almost calm. The judge has scheduled a full evidentiary trial. For the first time since this nightmare began, there would be nowhere left for Linda Ashcroft, or anyone else, to hide. The county courthouse looked exactly the way I remembered from jury duty years earlier. Red brick, white columns, and an American flag hanging almost motionless in the still morning air. Only this time, I wasn't there as a spectator. I was there because someone had tried to take my property rights by rewriting reality. Emily met me outside the courtroom carrying 2 rolling trial cases stuffed with binders. You ready? She asked. As ready as I'll ever be, she smiled. Good. Because they're not. Inside, every seat in the gallery was occupied. Homeowners from Willow Ridge filled the back rows. Several local reporters sat with notebooks open. A television camera waited just outside the courtroom doors, barred from filming inside but ready for interviews afterward. At the defense table, Linda Ashcroft wore a tailored cream-colored suit and stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge me. Beside her sat Brandon Pierce, flipping through legal pads with the confidence of someone who believed he could still talk his way out of this. That confidence disappeared the moment Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. Good morning, she said firmly, as everyone stood. This court is now in session. The trial began with opening statements. Brandon stood first. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly. "This is nothing more than a misunderstanding, fueled by speculation and unfortunate utility failures. My clients acted in good faith while attempting to improve infrastructure for an entire community." He glanced toward me. "Mr. Carter has transformed ordinary maintenance into an elaborate conspiracy." A few jurors remained expressionless. Others simply listened. Then Emily stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace dramatically. She simply placed one hand on our evidence table. "This case," she began, "is about what happens when people believe money and authority place them above the law." She paused. "The defendants forged documents, ignored property rights, trespassed on private land, and interfered with electrical infrastructure serving hundreds of families." She looked directly at the jury. "And today, every one of those actions will be supported by documents, photographs, witnesses, and their own words." The room became noticeably quieter. The prosecution's first witness was Thomas Gallagher, the utility engineer. He explained the design of Willow Ridge's electrical system, using enlarged diagrams displayed on monitors throughout the courtroom. "The primary distribution feeder," he testified, pointing with a laser pointer, "crosses Mr. Carter's property through a recorded easement established decades before the subdivision existed." Emily asked, "Could that line legally be relocated without Mr. Carter's consent?" "No. What if someone forged that consent?" Thomas looked toward the jury. "It would invalidate the entire request." Emily displayed the relocation application. "Do you recognize this document?" "I do." "What concerned your department?" "The signature." "Why?" "It didn't match verified records." The courtroom clerk projected both signatures side by side. "Even from where I sat, the differences were obvious." Brandon objected. "Speculation." "Overruled," Judge Whitmore replied immediately. Emily then introduced the GPS tracking records from the HOA maintenance truck. Thomas confirmed every coordinate, every timestamp, every stop, including the 34 minutes spent beside the utility pole on my property. The jury members began taking notes. Next came the photographs. One by one, the images appeared on the courtroom screens. The white HOA truck, workers unloading insulated tools, fresh cuts on the electrical line, Linda Ashcroft, standing only a few yards away. For the first time all morning, Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Brandon immediately rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Gallagher," he began confidently, "isn't it possible my client was merely observing routine maintenance?" Thomas answered without hesitation. "No." "Why not?" "Because no maintenance was scheduled." Silence. Brandon changed tactics. "Can you personally testify that Mrs. Ashcroft ordered anyone to cut power?" "No." A faint smile returned to Brandon's face. "But," Thomas continued before he could sit down, "I can testify that every contractor on site reported they were acting under instructions from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association." The smile vanished. Emily called her next witness. The courtroom doors opened. The deputy sheriff, who had responded to my property weeks earlier, walked to the witness stand. Then, just as he was sworn in, Emily reached beneath her table and lifted a sealed evidence box. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is now prepared to introduce previously unreleased video evidence obtained through discovery." Brandon's face instantly lost all color. He knew exactly what was inside that box, and judging by the panic in his eyes, so did Linda. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the soft hum of the overhead lights. Emily carried the sealed evidence box to the clerk's table, broke the seal, and removed a solid-state drive. "Your Honor," she said, "this footage was recovered during discovery from the HOA's own maintenance truck after the court ordered the preservation of electronic records. It has been authenticated by a digital forensic examiner." Judge Whitmore nodded. "You may proceed." The courtroom lights dimmed as the video appeared on the large monitors. The recording came from a dashboard camera inside the HOA maintenance truck. The date matched the day my power was cut. The timestamp matched the GPS logs. For a few seconds, the video showed nothing more than workers driving toward my property. Then the truck stopped. The driver's door opened. Linda Ashcroft stepped into view. The courtroom remained silent. She wasn't standing hundreds of feet away. She wasn't simply observing. She walked directly to the utility pole, pointed at the overhead line, and said clearly enough for the camera microphone to capture every word, "That one." A worker hesitated. "Ma'am, are we sure the utility approved this?" Linda crossed her arms. "We've already handled the paperwork." Another worker looked uncertain. "I thought we were supposed to wait for confirmation." Brandon Pierce's voice came through from outside the truck. "You have written authorization." One of the workers asked the question that changed everything. "What if it's the wrong line?" Brandon answered without hesitation. "It isn't. Just finish the job." Emily paused the video. The courtroom was completely still. She looked toward the defense table. No further questions regarding who gave the order. Brandon remained seated. His shoulders had slumped. For the first time since the trial began, he had nothing to say. Emily resumed the video. A pair of insulated cutters closed around the electrical line. Seconds later, sparks flashed. The worker immediately looked alarmed. "That didn't seem right," another voice replied nervously. "The voltage isn't reading what we expected." Brandon's voice again. "Leave it." The recording ended. Judge Whitmore removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Linda Ashcroft. "Mrs. Ashcroft," she said calmly, "would you like to revise any portion of your sworn testimony?" Linda's attorney slowly stood. After several long seconds, he spoke quietly. "Your Honor." He glanced at his client before taking a deep breath. "The defense withdraws its previous denial." A ripple spread through the gallery. Several Willow Ridge homeowners shook their heads in disbelief. Others simply stared at Linda. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "This court takes an extremely dim view of forged documents, unauthorized interference with public utilities, trespass upon private property, and false testimony given under oath." Her voice remained calm, but every word landed like a hammer. "The evidence establishes a deliberate pattern of misconduct." She looked at me briefly before continuing. "The plaintiff's property rights were repeatedly violated." She turned toward Linda. "The defendants knowingly exceeded the authority granted to a homeowners association." Then came the verdict. "Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff." Relief washed over me so suddenly that I had to grip the edge of the table. Judge Whitmore continued reading. "The defendants are jointly and severally liable for compensatory damages, punitive damages, attorney's fees, and all litigation costs." She wasn't finished. "The court further orders the immediate resignation of Mrs. Linda Ashcroft from any position of authority within the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, pending additional regulatory review." Several homeowners quietly applauded before the bailiff called for order. The judge added one final statement. "Certified copies of this record shall be forwarded to the district attorney and the appropriate federal authorities for review of potential criminal violations involving forged documents and interference with electrical infrastructure." Linda closed her eyes. Brandon said nothing. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Emily and me. One journalist asked, "Mr. Carter, after everything you've been through, what are you feeling right now?" I looked back at the courthouse. I never wanted revenge. I smiled for what felt like the first genuine time in months. I just wanted the truth to have a chance. Behind us, homeowners from Willow Ridge quietly walked past Linda without saying a word. The woman who had ruled the neighborhood through intimidation stood completely alone. Her authority had vanished, and for the first time since this nightmare began, the lights in Willow Ridge finally came back on. In more ways than one, nearly a year has passed since the courtroom doors closed behind us. Life on my family's property has finally returned to something that feels normal. The utility company restored every affected easement, installed permanent monitoring equipment, and worked directly with me to ensure no future maintenance could ever occur without proper authorization and written notice. My business survived the storm. In fact, it grew. Many of the homeowners who once believed the HOA's accusations eventually became customers and, more importantly, friends. Several stopped by just to apologize for believing rumors before knowing the facts. I never held it against them. Fear and misinformation have a way of spreading faster than the truth. As for Willow Ridge Estates, the association elected an entirely new board. They adopted stricter transparency rules, required independent legal reviews before major decisions, and opened every board meeting to homeowners. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start. This experience taught me something I'll never forget. Ownership isn't just about possessing land. It's about standing up for your rights when someone believes they can take them away. The truth may move slowly, but when it's backed by evidence, patience, and integrity, it has a way of catching up with everyone. Thank you so much for watching my story. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, neighbor, or local authority that abused its power? What would you have done if someone had cut the power to your home without warning? Share your experience in the comments. I read as many as I can. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next true-to-life neighborhood drama. Until next time, take care of your home, stand up for what's right, and never let anyone convince you that doing the right thing isn't worth the fight. The end.